Don't forget Dustin f***ed you up, but he's scared of me. You're both some bitches, and I slapped Kebab. He was scared with no counter, and he owned you. So who's the real king? Me, bitch. That's who. King Nate Dogg. I forget nothing, bro, and you'll see that soon enough. And don't talk to me about a little slap and a scuffle. I had them all trapped thinking they were dead. You're the king of nothing. You couldn't even win your own belt they made for you, let alone any other. And with that, welcome to Stoppage, the show with the news of the day. Is usually given just enough time, but sometimes not enough. If this is your first time stopping by, we thank you, and get ready for something you won't find anywhere else. I'm John Franklin, and I'm joined by the God, Father of Fight Night Picks, Craig Allen. Craig, how are you?
John, I'm well. I mean, listen, we're late night on a Thursday night here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. I've got a brew on my specially made, look at that, Fight Night Picks coasters. How crazy is that? That was a lovely little gift from the in-laws from this Christmas. I use them all the time. Limited edition to this house. But other than that, John, I'm excited. Like, we had the relaunch of This Week in MMA earlier on in the week, and I don't want to take any shine away from this show, but I will say we're not going to repeat like any of the topics from that show. And that's what makes it interesting. So listen, I'm really looking forward to it. We've had so much news break from early on in the week till now. And I've got a special shirt on for today. And if you can decipher that, well, then really you're a wizard and you're a true fan of the show.
Listen, there is some, I understand, it's kind of, a little bit, I don't want to say blasphemous. That's not the word, especially not right before Good Friday. But, to start talking about that show at the beginning of this show, it's tricky. One show's Brooke Lopez, the other's Robin Lopez. They're similar, but not the same. I enjoy both. I'm sure the fans enjoy both. We don't really get into like promotional stuff or Bellator, so maybe that's an opportunity over there. Craig, on this episode of Early Stoppage, we open up the UFC's books, talk undercutting other fighters, and welcome back to Spider. But we begin by potentially saying goodbye to a GOAT. Craig, Jon Jones followed Francis Ngannou's victory over Stipe Miocic by declaring that he was next by tweeting, "Show me the money," and has spent the days following the fight toggling between touting his worth and requesting his release. Craig, Chael Sonnen, big surprise here, thinks what Jon Jones is doing is a fool's errand because Jones has no leverage. What do you think?
Listen, I mean, this is going to be a topic that we're going to talk about throughout the show. And the show pretty much revolves around Jon Jones, fighter pay, this and that. So if that's what you're into, strap in. But I look at this one, and I mean, Jon Jones is your GOAT. He's your pound-for-pound number one that Khabib's officially retired. We got that out of the way. But for Jon Jones, he's in no man's land. He's your number one pound-for-pound fighter, and he doesn't even have a title wrapped around his waist. Is he a light heavyweight? Is he a heavyweight? Well, according to him and according to a show that we did, 2 months ago now, he weighs 250 pounds, 254 pounds, thereabouts, and he seemed primed and ready for that shot. Now, Dana White had almost just about guaranteed the fact that Jones would get the winner of Miocic and Ngannou, and then after the fight, he kind of walked back his comments, and that was really strange for me, especially, you pumped up Jon Jones so much. It's not like we really got much in terms of promotional material out of it, but it seemed to me like that was a fight that had already been booked. Contracts just needed to be signed. It was inevitable. So here, I do agree with Chael Sonnen in a bit of a pinch. I mean, you look at Jon Jones. Okay, so if he wants to get released, so be it. But if you go to Bellator, do you think they're really going to fork over $8 to $10 million a fight for Jon Jones? The PFL, they're spending millions of dollars on, Ray Lewis and Kenny Florian and whoever they can get their hands on. Do you think they're going to spend $8 to $10 million on Jon Jones? No. So that leaves me with what? UAE Warriors? Maybe one championship? Like, who else can fork over that kind of dough? There really isn't anybody out there unless Oscar De La Hoya and Tito Ortiz want to get back into the MMA game. And hey, maybe they do. But to me, yeah, I think, Jon Jones kind of asking for the world, and I think he's not going to get it.
Well, I'm of two minds on this one, as I'm of two minds on a lot of things, because as we'll get to later when we talk Anderson Silva, I was born in June and I'm a Gemini, so I have a lot of duality to me. So with this one, here's where I find it interesting. I think that, there's a saying, hustle till you no longer have to introduce yourself. Well, I have another one for Jon Jones. If you have to tell me your value, you don't have as much value as you think you do. Because if you were supremely valuable, I would be telling you how valuable you are, not vice versa. Now, with all that being said, I think that he's going to have a tough go of it trying to improve his leverage or gain leverage with the UFC. But there's one thing that I find interesting here, and we really haven't seen this a lot, and I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. Feel free to destroy it like you do every other great theory that I have, and then months later you act like you were with them from the beginning. But the one this week is, what if he went to Bellator, who has a pretty good light heavyweight division, who has a pretty good heavyweight division, right? We're going to get to that later as well. And he resurrected their pay-per-view model under the auspices of that he's kind of in sales in a way, and almost a pay per performance kind of a thing. And he tells Bellator, I want you guys to promote me, and I want 30% of whatever I bring in, 40% of whatever I bring in on a pay-per-view model. Do you think that Jon Jones, this would be the betting on yourself kind of thing? Do you think Jon Jones would bring in enough money if he said, I want a percentage of the gate to then, because that's what movie stars do. Movie stars get a percentage of, certain guys get a percentage of what the box office does. So they're betting on themselves in a way. What do you think about that?
I mean, I've got a couple jabs at Bellator as the show goes on. And the funny thing about Bellator, and I've talked about this with newly minted Fight Night picker, JHK MMA. John, did you know that our pal JHK is a Bellator MMA rankings panelist?
I didn't know that.
He is, and I had a bone to pick with him because the phone never rang for Fight Night picks, and I take offense to that. Bellator, ooh boy. I said nice things about you for the longest time. I've been a big supporter, and now look what you've done to me. So now I have to go against Bellator a bit. But I think it makes sense. I mean, John, if we actually do look at those Bellator rankings at heavyweight, your champ's still Ryan Bader. Do you know, try and guess, and the guy's on a heater, try and guess who their number one contender is at heavyweight. Don't look it up. I know you are right now, but just try to guess.
The best part is I'm looking at the Bellator rankings for something else. The number one heavyweight.
Ranked heavyweight. Yep.
Number one ranked heavyweight.
Makes for great
Mitrione.
podcasting. Matt Mitrione is currently ranked 8th. He's 13-8 career. Tim Johnson is their number one ranked heavyweight. And he's on a heater. Wins over Czech Congo. He's got a big win over Tyrell Fortune. He's probably next in line for a title shot. Jon Jones would mop the floor with the heavyweights over there. I mean, Moldavsky's good. He's up there. Then you look at light heavyweight. It goes Nemkov, Bader, Davis, Anderson, Machida, Anglikas, Neal, Edwards, Tyree Fortune, who hasn't fought in forever, and he hasn't been active. Melvin Manhoff is their 9th ranked light heavyweight. And 10 is Alex Polizzi, who's 7-1. I think Jon Jones could pull a move like that. The trouble is Bellator hasn't had a pay-per-view since what? Bellator NYC, which was like when I first started to get really back into Bellator. And that was an awesome card. But now that they moved into the CBSs and Showtimes of the world, is Showtime adept at promoting pay-per-views? Sure they are. But I just don't see it with MMA just yet.
Is there a path towards the type of money that Jon Jones wants anywhere but the UFC? Because let's throw some scenarios out here. If you're looking at the Bellator rankings, is there any guy that you put next to Jon Jones in a poster that gives you 700,000 buys?
Fedor.
Okay, so Fedor. JDS, could he fight the guys that he never fought? Overeem, JDS, we'll get to those guys later. Bader, Phil Davis.
There's levels. I mean,
I
Beast
agree.
25-8 maybe, but probably not.
So now, okay, let's change the venue. And I don't want to stay on this all night, but let's change the venue. Do you think that if Jon Jones was, and this is really taking a stretch here. He was with Bellator, but Bellator co-promoted with Triller. Could he get those kind of numbers? I'm trying to generate buys for Jon here, and I don't know that I see the path. Do you?
I mean, I think, let's move away from the pay-per-view model. If you want eyes on the sport, I think where one championship's going on TNT next month, if they went, hey, listen, Jon, you can have as many picograms as you want in your system. We're going to hold the fights in Singapore. Forget about USADA. But we're also going to give a picogram advantage to one of your former opponents. You know where I'm going with this? I mean, what if he fought the crazy Brazilian himself? What if we had Vitor Belfort and Jon Jones again? Would you watch it?
That'd be crazy if Vitor almost beat him. Broke his arm.
Probably watch it. So let's move on, John. And listen, as I just mentioned, Bruce Buffer hit us with an and new to conclude UFC 260. So there's a new sheriff in town. His name is Francis Ngannou. And Francis seems to want to go into business with Jon Jones, but he's not ruling out Derrick Lewis, as was mentioned. Maybe we end up with the UFC card in Africa as well. So what's Francis Ngannou's play with the UFC moving forward? Is it Jon Jones? Is it Stipe Miocic in a trilogy, or Derrick Lewis? And if you're Stipe, how quickly do you get back on the horse here?
This is a tough one for me because I think that Jones is the money fight. Lewis cleans up probably the biggest blemish on Ngannou's record, which is that horrible fight they put together a couple of years ago. And Stipe is really more risk than reward, because if you lose, you know how these trilogies go. If you lose two of them, the third, no one cares about the third. So if he loses the trilogy, now Stipe, I think that you got to go on a little bit of a run. So if I'm setting this up, the problem at heavyweight is that anybody can knock anybody out at any time. And the fact that Ngannou put the performance he did on last time against Lewis lets us know that he's enough of a basket case that even after a couple of years in the sport like he had, and everything that he had done leading up to that fight, he could still lay an egg. So I don't think that's the same Francis Ngannou that we have now, but he's always had power. So to say that, let's say he's the same guy between the years he's always been, and he just improved his wrestling, and that's why he beat Miocic this time and not last time. I would worry. I think the path for him would be Lewis, Jones, because if I'm him, I don't even want to get in the middle of what the UFC has going on with Jones right now. I don't want to take a side. I don't want to seem like I'm a company man. Just stay the hell out of it. I would say whatever the UFC wants, whatever. I'm the champ, fine. I would go Lewis, Jones, Miocic trilogy fight.
I agree.
It's
kind of funny because that's a conversation. Those three guys, I mean, that was a question, right? But there's one guy in here that I think really kind of spices things up and makes this more interesting. And it's a more competitive fight than any of the three. And that might sound crazy, but Alexander Volkov, I think the best fight is Volkov and Ngannou. That's the one that I want to see. I mean, you talk wrestling, counter wrestling, power shots, the power jab from Volkov, the leg kicks from both guys. Now all of a sudden Francis has a head kick and some wrestling in his own back pocket as well. So I like a fight with Volkov right off the hop if you want to go on a run. But I get it. I mean, Lewis is coming off of a huge win in his own right. You rematch those guys, I expect fireworks, but again, everybody expected fireworks the first time. So who's to say that it's guaranteed? Now, I know, and I don't want to tip our hand, but we're going to talk about it. The fact that Kevin Holland's being rewarded off of an awful performance with another 5-round main event. You had such an awful performance the first time. You want to rematch these guys? It was arguably the worst fight in MMA history, just based on the tension level and the excitement level. So for me, I do agree with you, though. I would go with Lewis, Jones, Miocic, and you give Stipe some time off. And it's a shame, too, that he's had so much time off between fights. But, I mean, it is what you have to do, especially coming off such a brutal loss in that last fight at 260.
You know what? Maybe I'm not as hip to Stipe's injury history or any of that stuff, but, like, Stipe to me seems like a guy that, like, likes, and this is a shout to the recap show where we do the victory lap. Stipe likes the victory lap. He likes to win the fight, go to the Cavs game, wait around for spring training. We'll go to the Indians game. Like, this guy likes to get out there after he gets a W. He wants to do a couple of shifts at the firehouse. He wants to, knock his wife up, let the kid get born. I mean, this guy does everything in between fights. So I like you said, to give him a little bit of time. He's going to take the time either way. That's just how he is. But, where it really gets interesting is that, I mean, listen, Lewis and Ngannou used to be a punchline for us, for everybody. And that's a hell of a risk booking that fight again. I mean, there are some guys that get together, rest in peace, Arturo Gatti. If him and Mickey Ward fought 100 times, you'd have 100 great fights. It could be the exact opposite with Ngannou and Lewis.
Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, and you saw what happened to Derrick Lewis in his one and only UFC title shot too. So who's to say that doesn't happen again?
There you go. Craig, look at us. Who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
Not me. UFC 262 keeps heating up and just added as a special 5-round co-main event, which in and of itself is a whole nother discussion. Third ranked Leon Edwards and unranked Nathan Diaz. The fight was a surprise to everyone. Surprise, surprise, motherfuckers. So in this case, who's the real winner going into the fight? And the bigger question I want to ask you, Craig, is do you think booking Leon Edwards with Nate Diaz is a sign of disrespect towards Leon Edwards from the UFC?
John, I'm going to read something that's disgusting. I just went on Twitter because I was looking to build this one up. I'm going to read you a tweet. This is breaking news as we make this podcast. Aaron Bronstetter just tweeted out, they just made a PA announcement at CFFC 94, and they're trying to locate a fighter's missing finger. It evidently fell off into his glove during the bout and is missing somewhere in the venue. John, thoughts?
For a memorabilia standpoint, I mean, that's got to draw a lot of money over that. No, that's pretty disgusting. And that's the only thought I have.
Glad I checked Twitter as we were doing this. Who's the biggest winner out of Nate Diaz fighting Leon Edwards? It's Robbie Lawler. Why is it Robbie Lawler, John?
I would love to know how it's Robbie Lawler. Please tell me.
Because Nate Diaz is unranked, and he gets a fight against the third-ranked welterweight in the world. Robbie Lawler is currently ranked 15th. His last win was at UFC 214 on July 29th, 2017. That was 1,343 days ago. If Nate Diaz is unranked and he can get a fight against a number 3 fighter, what does that mean for a 15th ranked fighter? I'd say Robbie Lawler, biggest winner out of all this.
Yeah, he's going to get Usman.
Yeah.
Masvidal falls out, Robbie Lawler goes right in. Former champ.
Robbie Lawler, he just cashes in the money in the bank. But yeah, I look at this one. I mean, who's the real winner? Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards almost poked a guy's eye out in his last fight. Like, he did a great job. Now, again, we're talking about people losing fingers in cages and Bilal Muhammad's eye getting shoved in. But for Leon Edwards to have so much time on the shelf, for him to have the fight booked against Tyron Woodley at UFC London, it falls out. He has a terrible year. Comes back in great shape for that fight with Muhammad. And he was doing great work in that one. For that fight to end the way it did, it's almost like, boom, here's your prize. And you talk about a money in the bank, a 5-round fight in a co-main event. If you can do work and get steady boxing off on Nate Diaz, which is no easy task, would you not expect him to open up a little bit? Would you not expect some cuts to start popping up like they did in the Masvidal fight? I think Leon Edwards has an awesome opportunity in this fight to earn himself a title shot that would have been more impressive than if he just had a win over Bilal Muhammad, who was nonetheless stepping in on short notice for Khamzat Chimaev. So for me, it's Edwards. And I bet a lot of people didn't know. You can make any fight you want a 5-rounder in MMA under the unified rules.
Yeah, you know, it's weird. On the one hand, I think it's a little bit of disrespect for Leon Edwards. They just let Bilal Muhammad slide into a shot with him. So, and there's no disrespect to Bilal Muhammad. Now Nate Diaz, there's a couple ways to look at it. On the one hand, you could say it's disrespectful for the number 3 ranked fighter to fight a guy who's unranked. On the other hand, you could look at it like the UFC says, well, not enough people know Leon Edwards. If he fights Nate Diaz, a guy that may be washed, now he gets a higher profile, an easier fight, and we're lining him up potentially to fight Kamaru Usman down the road. You know, the winner of now here's where it gets real weird because, you know, if you're setting him up to fight the winner of Usman Masvidal, Chael Sonnen thinks that the Masvidal Edwards fight, we talked about this 100 years ago, the Masvidal Edwards fight's never going to happen because you can't book a fight off of something like the 3-piece Minnesota because then everybody would be doing it. I think that if these guys come together organically, and I bet you if you go back into the early Stoppage archives, I said this then, if Edwards and Masvidal happen organically, which would be Edwards beating Diaz and Masvidal beating Usman, then you could do it. But booking it just off the 3-piece Minnesota probably wouldn't happen. So I think that's probably, this is a way to say, you know, I have a theory about Nate Diaz that they just text him names and they're like, whatever he says yes to, it's like, you have no idea. They're like, text him Leon Edwards. And then thinking, you know, he's going to say what he says to every other damn fight. And then he texts back, yes. And the UFC officer's like, he said yes? Wait, he said yes to Edwards? And they're all like, they can't believe it. So listen, I think this is setting up, if Masvidal should beat Usman, this kind of works. Listen.
All right, John, we
be a
move
professional.
along. And John, from a business sense, it's a neat time to sit back and watch the MMA landscape take shape. And listen, if you want to move it over to the great new show and the reboot, we have a new segment called MMA Landscaping. So check it out. But realistically, I mean, the PFL is signing anyone and everyone with a pulse. Bellator's back and on Showtime, but they don't have a network in Canada, and they just decided for the rest of the world, here, you can have it free on YouTube this week. And the UFC is making moves as well. Parent company Endevor is looking to have 100% controlling interest in the UFC ahead of their IPO set to take place later on this year. And as an aside, they were already set to go public back in 2018. They had a little bit of a snafu with the Writers Guild of America, and that one went sour. They figured that out a few years later, and now it's time to shine. So along with the Jon Jones fighter pay saga, fighters will gain somewhat from the Reebok deal if they move into this new Venum deal, and it's only by about $1,000 plus or minus per fight. So it's interesting to see that deal is going to kick off this month. It was also interesting if you check out the UFC store and Venum store, no mention of either products really kind of cross-promoting just yet. So here's the question, John. With the UFC thriving last year during the pandemic, and now the biggest sports star calling out the company on the issue of fighter pay, will this distract from Endeavor's intent to drive up their price of their assets in total before they go public here?
A couple other side notes before I get into the answer to your question. One, is Endevor actually spelled with a U, or is that some Canadian bullshit I'm looking at here?
That's some Canadian stuff, and I've really tried to do a better job, but yeah, the old Canadian British spelling, it gets me every time.
Should have known. Follow-up question, which is completely unrelated, so I guess it's not a follow-up. If Reebok, you say like if the UFC can't give Jon Jones $15 million, how could Bellator? If Reebok couldn't pay these fighters adequately, how the hell is Venum? I feel like Venum is like a front. Like next season on Ozark, we're going to find out that Jason Bateman Marty Bird is laundering money through Venum, and that's how they're able to pay all these fighters. Who knows?
That's a joke. That's a joke on a podcast. Not serious.
Not serious, allegedly. So here's the question. Here's the answer to the question. Will all of this distract from Endeavor's intent to drive up the price of the ad? I don't think so. I think that the money guys are the money guys. I think that Jon is a pain in the neck, but I do think that, listen, he rarely gets what he wants. I mean, he makes good money, but he's played this game before, and I doubt that anything is going to stop. The fact that Endevor wanted to buy out the rest of the UFC tells me they see real value there, and I think that their plan is going to be something akin to what we talked about when they initially bought the percentage of the UFC they did, which is I think they've been waiting to use their vast resources to market UFC fighters, and once they are in full control of the company, you'll start seeing MMA fighters popping up in all different vehicles, if you will.
You think there's going to be a spot like on The Mandalorian for a UFC fighter that's not too controversial?
Perhaps.
To me, I feel like the UFC could market Katag Playev's finger at this point, and they'd still be able to gain. That's a CFFC inside joke as we get going on with the show. But really, I mean, yeah, the Jon Jones thing, I don't think it distracts too much from it. If there was a big Project Spearhead and Jon Jones spearheaded Project Spearhead, have we talked about that on this show? It feels like every other show we do. But now that Jon Jones is really making it front and center, it could get interesting. I just don't see it becoming such an issue for so many fighters that we do see, any issues for Endevor in the purchase of the UFC. And you got to think of it. If you're in Endeavor's shoes, last year UFC was a huge moneymaker. The deal with ESPN and, Disney at the same time, that's been great business as well. They continue to thrive. UFC is just doing, insane numbers for them. So it doesn't really make a big difference. I do think the Venum thing is interesting, and it's kind of difficult because these are two topics that you're trying to intertwine. But with Venum, I get the joke, and I agree with you too, because, you look at Venum and you look at the pricing guide, and it's weird, right? Because with Reebok, when did the deal come into effect? 2015, 16? And then it stayed steady. wasn't really like a whole lot changed. And then you saw that overall payout. What was it supposed to be from Reebok? 70 million, and they hit barely 40. Like, there was a lot of money left on the table. With Venum, you look at it, and I mean, yeah, they're offering an extra $2,000 more. I assume that just takes into account inflation and the rising prices in the market. So for me, it's not a huge difference from Reebok to Venum. It's nice to see those numbers on a page, but they don't really mean a lot in the grand scheme of things. But I am really interested to see what the fight kits look like and all of that jazz, because, yeah, it's April 1st, and somebody might have fooled me because I can't find this stuff anywhere.
Yeah, it's really curious. And the one thing that doesn't get enough credit on this show is not just Craig Allen's ability to do an inside joke. It's to do an inside joke on the fly. Okay, that happened. This is in real time. This young man's creating inside jokes, okay? So tip your damn cap to him already. Craig, Luke Rockhold came out this week on your favorite podcast, Bro Bible's Ripping It, and let it rip. He talked about the UFC's mafioso tactics, and even Dana White caught some shade. The quotes are as following. He said, modeling, the only reason I modeled in the first place is because fighting is like a mafia. They have these very mafioso type tactics in negotiations. They try to fuck with you. I'm not having any of it. If you don't know your worth, someone will tell you your worth, and it'll be less than your worth. So know your worth and leverage yourself too. Once I lost the world title, Dana White came up to me and tried to beat me down mentally. And I was like, fuck you, straight up. I was like, I'm going to do my thing. If you're going to try and offer me this and that bullshit, you know who I am, and you know what I did. That's the only reason I went out and got a modeling contract, so I could leverage myself. And then he said, believe, achieve, and then, all that stuff he said to Bisbing. Let's talk here. I mean, is this kind of Luke Rockhold's, swan song, curtain call on the way out to say, fuck you, Dana, and I'm going to Bellator? Or do you think that he's doing this on behalf of fighters and sort of being an advocate for them, or do you think he just was talking out of his neck on a podcast?
And then he had his knee braces on and his blue jeans, and he took 2 beers and he smashed them on the turnbuckle, and he gave a stone cold stunner to Vince McMahon on the way out. Like, is he stone cold Steve Austin at this point? Can you get the hair out of your tongue, John? Come on, we're professionals here. But I look at this, and I mean, for Luke Rockhold, what's the scoop? Right? Because at this point in his career, he's kind of teased a comeback. He's still gone between gyms. You talked about the modeling career. Listen, he's not like David Duchovny in Zoolander. He can't be a shin model at this point. If David was a hand model, he's no George Costanza of the shin. But I look at this, and if you want overall thoughts, if Luke Rockhold was really doing well, he'd be on Fight Night Picks Early Stoppage and not a podcast called Ripping It. Like, what are we doing here, Luke? He'd be on Bussin' with the Boys. He'd be on King and the Sting with Brendan Schaub. Great take on Francis Ngannou, Brendan, when he said he'd have no new wrinkles to his game and no wrestling. Where'd you learn that? But yeah, for me, I look at this one. I mean, yeah, I think it's just Luke Rockhold, exit stage left, and, we're just going to let it fly from now on.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, the problem is that people say the right thing and they say it at the wrong time, right? He should have been saying this shit when he had leverage. He was a champ and all that. Now that it all sounds like sour grapes. And, I think that he's probably on his way out. It's probably best for him that he's on his way out. We talk about this all the time. A guy like him going to PFL, a guy like him going to Bellator makes things interesting. The UFC has lost their use for him. He's pretty much lost his use for them. And I say, listen, next time, instead of going on Ripping It, go on Shooting the Shit and see what's going on over there. Maybe they'll have some better questions for you. But I think that, I think that Luke is, he said the right thing at the wrong time.
Fair enough, John. We'll move on. Out, and MMA Fighting confirmed with a league official that your favorite organization, the PFL, is set to implement changes to its rules and format for the upcoming 2021 season that's about to kick off in the next couple of months, next month, really. And it includes a greater penalty for fighters who fail to make weight, who will now have 1 point deducted from their season total. And you have to keep in mind, because PFL has been around for a while, they like to take a page out of the major sporting leagues where they have a season format. There's points totals. You seed in the playoffs and so on and so forth. Basically, if you suck, you probably don't have an extra chance in, unless you're Alex Gilpin and you fight the champ 3 times in a season. In previous seasons, weight miss would render a fighter ineligible to earn points in a scheduled bout. Even with a victory, now a fighter can actually lose points that they've won. So, John, is this the right step for the Professional Fighters League to take here?
If you guys had Craig mentioning Alex Gilpin, go ahead and take a shot. Yeah, I think that, sometimes when these things happen, I hope that there's a broader solution that comes from it. Obviously, there won't be a broader solution based on what the PFL did here because they're the only one that has this format. So it's not like the UFC can't deduct points because they don't give points. So I think that I like that they are taking it seriously enough to deduct points. But then we get into this weird equation of how many points can you lose before you're eliminated, and if you're eliminated, what else point? Or is it like where everybody makes the playoffs? I thought that they did a good enough job early on in this whole playoff structure to at least keep interest of not everybody goes in, but you're still kind of. So I'm with it, but I think that I'd like to see a solution that's more across the board. We've talked in the past about a higher percentage of the opponent of your purse going to your opponent, things of that nature. That's probably the thing that's going to fix it. You got to always hit guys in the pocketbook. But I like the fact that they're addressing it.
Is this an idea that Baltimore Ravens great Ray Lewis came up with?
I think so.
Did carparts.com decided to flex their promotional muscle and go, hey, you need to make a change here? I mean, listen, I think it's a decent step in the right direction, and it really kind of thwarts some of those big weight miss opportunities. I mean, even with Bellator 255, when this comes out, knock wood tomorrow, but when this comes out, either before or after Bellator 255, you had a fighter miss weight and weighed in 171.1 pounds. Can you imagine missing weight by 0.1 of a pound? So how would that affect somebody if it was with PFL? It's very interesting to kind of look at, but in terms of it being a right step for the organization, I think it's an interesting step. I can't wait to see how it plays out. But for me, the thing that I'd love to see implemented with weight cutting, and of course, I don't cut weight. I'm just in a state of perpetual will chokeness. But when I look at weight cutting, I'd like to see it. If a fighter misses weight, you bring him out into the center of the cage, you show them off to the three judges, and you say, hey, 1 point deduction, shame them. Exactly. And maybe that would deter them. But listen, kudos to the PFL for making changes.
Yeah, I think that they show you where the suggestion box is early in the PFL. So Ray Lewis came into town, Car Parts Stock. I said, fellas, the suggestion box is right over there. Let us know whatever you think. All right, Craig, let's move on to sparring sessions. This week, when Jon Jones was complaining about his pay and saying that $8 to $10 million wasn't enough, our old friend, Derrick Lewis, the Beast, wasted no time saying, I'll do it for $8 million. So we've had this conversation for a long time, and I can remember specifically having this probably as a start to conversation a while back. So I asked this two ways. The actual question, which I'll put out to you, is if Derrick Lewis takes money Jon Jones wouldn't to fight Francis Ngannou, is he betraying both Jon Jones and all the fighters? And I guess the second question would be, which I know for a fact we addressed a long time ago in early stoppage, is does a fighter have an obligation if he has a different set of needs and he's on a different tier financially to not undercut other fighters for the good of the group?
We definitely talked about this on Start the Conversation a long time ago. And listen, if I'm in Derrick Lewis' shoes, and you've got a guy in Jon Jones that's asking for more than 8 to 10 million. And the UFC says, look, Derrick, we really need to have a big fight, International Fight Week. You've got that rivalry, that built-in rematch with Francis Ngannou. Here's your opportunity to use a phrase that I've already used before. Cash in your money in the bank. Here it is. We're going to give you $2.5 million, and we're going to give you pay-per-view bonus money. And you're going to earn a higher level of pay. Even if you lose, from here on out, you're going to get paid more for the rest of your UFC tenure. If you're Derrick Lewis, what do? Well, geez, I've got the rest of my life to live, so I'm probably going to take that money. And I agree, rising tide lifts all boats. So if Derrick makes a big deal about it, Jon Jones makes a big deal about it, now we're starting to get into that tiering situation where Derrick Lewis has been in the top 10 for how long now? He's been around for a very long time. He's been in and out of the top 5 for a long time. He's already had his title shot before. So Derrick Lewis is one of those fighters that could kind of flex it a little bit. The trouble with heavyweight, though, is where we've seen Junior Dos Santos and Alistair Overeem, not just out of the rankings, totally out of the promotion here recently. We've seen that changing of the guard where we have the prospects, the Romanovs, the Juan Espinos late in his career, gone. so on and so forth, Tom Aspinall and the like, those guys are going to fight for less money. And as it happens in the rest of these divisions, we're going to see fighters age out. But it's not like we've had fighters that have built themselves up or new contracts, made more and more money. We're starting to see these Dana White's Contender Series fighters coming in with lower base salaries and lower win bonuses that are really making their way up. So really the price tiering, if you will, is going to see a big shift, and you're going to see these lower cost options move up quicker. So unless you have a Jones or a Lewis advocating for, higher fighter pay for everyone, it's probably not going to happen. And if I'm Derrick Lewis, I take the money anyway.
Well, Jon Jones is in a weird spot here because he is one of the best fighters of all time, but he is not a draw. He is not a guy that is a guaranteed 1 million pay-per-view buy. He's not even really a guy that's guaranteed. GSP was a draw. GSP was, I'm going to do this number consistently. I'm going to be up over 650, 700 pay-per-view buys no matter who I fight. And that's just not who Jon Jones is. And where if we take this discussion and we spread it out to other sports, which you and I like to do. Here's the example. Okay, the New York Giants, my favorite football team, won the Super Bowl in 2008. They won the Super Bowl in 2008 not with Tiki Barber. They got rid of Tiki Barber. So Tiki Barber was a high-priced running back, and they won the Super Bowl without him. So in a way, you can't say if you're Tiki Barber, I held out for more money, and it was the responsibility of Ahmad Bradshaw or whoever the running back was to say, no, I'm not going to sign with you because I should get paid what Tiki Barber wanted to get paid. If Derrick Lewis, if $8 million is suitable for Derrick Lewis to fight Francis Ngannou, and the UFC feels like that's equivalent to the type of money it's going to draw, let's just say, as a hypothetical, Jon Jones fighting Francis Ngannou would draw 500,000 pay-per-view buys, and Derrick Lewis fighting him would draw 400,000. In the UFC's eyes, it's like, well, this kid will take the 8 million. Jon won't. We're not going to give Jon twice that for only 100,000 more pay-per-view buys. I think that's where it gets tricky. That, yeah, Derrick Lewis should fight the good fight, but also it's like the 8 million is a bigger deal to him than it is to Jon.
To me, I look at another sport, and it's, recent news because in this offseason, we had two big shortstops sign contracts in Major League Baseball. You had the contract with Tatis Jr. for $340 million at short. And then, a month later, you have Francisco Lindor go, man, look at me. I got an extra million, $341 million. How does that sound to the next crop of shortstops that have to sign really big deals? You got Bo Bichette with the Blue Jays. If he has a big year this year, who knows what could happen? So with guys like that getting more and more money, again, different sport, totally different logistics, but you look at it and, hey, it helps everybody out. But it'll be interesting to see. I threw up the quote, Derek Brunson with the I ain't never hear a fighter on top say fighters need to be paid more. It's always I need to be paid more. Smart logic say if you're on top, group up, which in return would benefit you later, but no one cares until it hits close to home. And I think Derek Brunson has a good point too. It's just put yourself in Derek Lewis's shoes. It's a really difficult decision if you're in that spot.
It's a timing issue. If you watch the show Price is Right, everybody hates the guy that goes $1 over because, like, dude, come on, put some thought into it. But let's talk about the guy in the negotiation that's willing to go $1 or $3 million less. He's the guy that's probably going to get what he wants. That's a lot of money to him. Listen, Derek Lewis doesn't have two brothers who played in the NFL. So he doesn't process finances the same way Jon Jones does. Jon Jones is literally keeping up with the Joneses because his brothers are Joneses and they made a lot of money in the NFL. So I think that Derek Lewis is right to take the money he can get.
All right, funny guy. We're going into the next segment. It's been a while since we've been doing this. We got to hit the speed bag. And if you're new to early stoppage and you've never seen this before, I have 5 rapid fire questions that Jon hasn't seen yet. He has no idea what these are going to be, and they're totally off the wall. Jon, are you ready for this?
I'm never ready for this. It always gives me anxiety. I never know what to. I'm the king of having 50 tabs. My students call me out on it all the time. So I never know what to put up. But you know what? Let's do it.
How many emails are in your inbox?
A lot.
3,420. Good guess?
Let's see.
Great podcasting.
Hold on.
I don't want to see it. I can't see that.
22,695.
That's disgusting. All right, John. UFC 262 is in Houston, and friend of the show, Tebe's going. He added us in a story today. If you went as a fan and not as a media member, where would you want to sit in this unique experience?
Everybody thinks cage side's the best place to sit until you cover a fight, and then you're like, it's really not the best place to sit. I like, so the floor and that first row elevated where you can see down into the cage. You can kind of have an idea what's going on. You can tell what's happening cage side. That's where I'd want to sit. But, if you're going to want to be seen, it's always cage side. So as a fan, the one place, as a baller, the other.
All right. Venum is the new UFC apparel manufacturer. But if another UFC fighter not named Gregor Gillespie were to become an outfitter, who would it be and why?
What do you mean by outfitter? Define that.
Like getting people ready to go fishing and out to the wilderness. Or a guide.
Another guy. Who's the kid that destroyed his nuts with was it a weed whacker? What's that kid's name?
Bryce Mitchell?
Bryce Mitchell, that's my guy.
I'm going to answer this one. I probably go with the pride of Ellsworth, Maine. We're going to go Tim Sylvia. One Championship has 4 events in April on TNT, and it's like WCW Nitro versus Raw. So, John, without looking, and you can't look, can you name 2 of the 8 headlining fighters for these 4 One Championship cards?
2 of the 8. Demetrius Johnson's one.
Yep.
And who's the kid he's fighting? Moraes?
Yeah, Adriano Moraes. You got it. Wow.
I got 2.
The other 6, Christian Lee's taking on Timofey Nastyukin. Amir Ali Akbari's taking on Anatoly Molyakin. And then you have Ong Lan Song taking on Vitaly Bigdash. Shout out to Ong Lan Song. There's going to be an interview with him dropping on Fight Night Picks tomorrow. The former double champ. All right. That's 3 out of the book. All right. Hammered away. We've hammered on Jon Jones and the entire saga that he's got going on so far. So let's go with the spin zone. Let's say Jones and the UFC make nice and he fights Francis this summer at International Fight Week. Give me another heavyweight who could up and leave the UFC for the money and wreck house elsewhere.
You talking about financially or fighting wise?
Both.
Lewis could cash in financially. Cyril Gane would be the best guy to leave. If he left, he would crush everybody.
I was thinking Volkov. All right, last one. We're getting spicy. Ben Askren is set to take on Jake Paul, and I couldn't care less. But let's have fun for a second. Give me a pay-per-view headliner on one of these Triller-type cards between one baseline UFC fighter and a YouTube star that you think would draw.
Oh, wow. Interesting. A baseline UFC fighter and a YouTube star. I'm going to go real wild. I'm going to go because my son likes this. And I'll tell you, I'll give you the context in case you don't know who it is. Dude Perfect, the guy with the beard, Tyler, against, he's a stocky guy, so give me another stocky guy. I bet you, let me get Tyler Tony from Dude Perfect against Jeremy Stevens. There you go.
I'm going to go with way off the board, and I just had to check because I figured, if she's a kid, yikes, but she's 17. Jojo Siwa and Jessica Penne. Make that fight. Make that fight. And that was hitting the speed bag, John.
All right, Craig, we move on to For the Gram. Let's talk TJ Dillashaw and Corey Sandhagen, former training partners. Dillashaw is really kind of gassing this thing up. His quotes are, I like Corey Sandhagen. He's become a little bit of a douche lately, talking that shit, which he's got to do. That's the name of the game. But I like Corey Sandhagen. I like all of his coaches. I like the Elevation Fight team. But that's the business. We're going to get out there. We're going to handle it. And I'm going to come back and get my belt. Like I said, these two used to train together. Do you believe there's real beef here? Do you think they're laying the groundwork for a future fight? I mean, Dillashaw, it would seem to me, has his sights set higher than Sandhagen. Do you think this is like the contingency plan? Or why do you think he's gassing this up?
Well, listen, John. I mean, I think we got to figure it out. So let's get it done right here because he already has a fight with Sandhagen booked for May. So I don't know. I mean, I didn't write this question. Yeah, he's laying the groundwork for a future fight. It's happening in May. But my real beef is, listen, I took 1 semester of German when I was in university. I had to take 2 language classes, and they couldn't be languages he already spoke. So French was out of the question. So I took Spanish. I didn't learn anything. But I took German, and I enjoyed it. John, my real question is, everybody says it's Sandhagen. Where did you pick up Sandhagen?
I watched that movie, Crazy Stupid Love with Ryan Gosling and Steve Carell. And there's a guy in there named David Lindhagen. Maybe that's where I picked it up. Listen, guys, I have children. I have students. We're back in person. I teach 5th and 6th graders. I forgot Dillashaw and Sandhagen, Hagen-Dazs, Sandhagen, Sandy, whatever. I forgot they're fighting. I apologize. Clearly, he's laying the groundwork. But do you think the beef is real, Craig?
No, I think TJ Dillashaw was supposed to have a title shot coming back, and now he has to sell a fight, and he feels butthurt about it. He's a little snake in the grass. But all of this stays in. All of this stays in.
Of course,
we won't blame it. We won't blame it on the alcohol. We'll blame it on the cola.
So listen, let's move on to one Twitter hitter. You know, guys, it always stays in when it's me. Craig cuts this beautiful thing of himself, but when it's me, it always stays in. Anyway, that's this is me airing our dirty laundry. One Twitter hitter, Anderson Silva, is going to fight Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. It's happening on June 19th, which happens to be my birthday. Forget the fight. Are you watching it? Number one, are you going to fly to Phoenix and watch it here? I'm texting guys. You got to know, okay? You got to know, Craig, that when I saw this thing was on my birthday, all right, listen, hey, it went out in a group text. There it is, folks. Anderson Silva, Cesar Chavez, party at my house. It's in a group text. I wasted no time. Craig, you're invited, and I'll be insulted if you don't show up. I don't care where you live, and I don't care where I live. What's your level of excitement, 1 to 10, on this fight?
So if I were to come down, which it's going to happen eventually, but if I were to come down, then I have to quarantine for 2 weeks when I come back, and I probably won't get my shot until June, maybe May, but probably June. So listen, I'm in a bad spot and in a bad way up here. But my question to you is, so you've got Anderson Silva. He has a pro boxing record. It's out there. But for Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., John, I became hip to Cesar Chavez Jr. when I started to follow boxing a little bit more. And it was when he fought in Phoenix. Did you go to that fight? His last fight in the States?
No, I didn't.
No? You know who he fought, though, was Daniel Jacobs. And so I know Daniel Jacobs. And again, casual boxing fan. I'm getting into it more and more. So he fights Daniel Jacobs. And I knew who Jacobs was. He'd overcome cancer. Like, I really like Daniel Jacobs. Because again, I'm a fan, not a boxing media member. So I'm going into that fight kind of cheering for Jacobs, but just enjoying the ride. Cesar Chavez Senior is there, sitting by himself in the crowd, and he's got like a Chavez headband on, and Junior quits on the stool. And throughout the fight, the commentary team's like, listen, he's kind of known as a goofball, he's kind of known as a quitter, and then the guy quits, and they pan to his dad, and his dad's sitting there with his face in his hands, like just sad as can be. So since then, Junior's gone on to fight in Tijuana to lose to a guy that was 11-0. And then he ended up winning a fight like in the middle of nowhere against a guy named Jason Minda, who's 14-2 on the regional scene in, close to his hometown. The craziest thing about this, I don't really care about Anderson Silva and Cesar Chavez Jr. I care more about the fact that Cesar Chavez Sr. is going to be fighting Hector Camacho Jr. on the same date. He's 58. What are we doing here?
It's getting crazy. I mean, everybody, the unfortunate part about this is in a time when these guys really could have cashed in on all this, we weren't in the world that we live in now. Celebrity boxing or throwing these fights together with older fighters used to be a joke, and it used to be like something that we weren't looking forward to. And now that there's money to be made, everybody in their, daddy's coming out, literally coming out and trying to get a fight. I will say this about sons of fighters. The reason why you become a boxer is not because things are going great, right? Typically, most boxers have the same story. And one of the things they've always said about the difference between MMA and boxing is most boxers have the same story. MMA fighters have 1,000 different stories. They went to college, they wrestled, because there's all these different disciplines. Most boxers have the same story. So I'm sure Julio Cesar Chavez had a story where he kind of came up. Now, his son has been the son of this great fighter who I'm sure people have been trying to get in the ring forever. And, I'm sure he has some skills. And I know nothing of the kid. He quit.
He's a quitter. If you listen to Morning Combat this week, and I had heard the story before, but they had to drag him out to fight Canelo. When he had the fight against Canelo, he pretty much didn't show up. He got robbed by a bunch of strippers after the fight. Like, the guy's a joke in boxing, and I knew that, not knowing anything about him going into a random fight against Daniel Jacobs.
Where this gets interesting to me, though, is Anderson Silva is not a boxer. However much boxing he does in MMA, he's not a boxer. He's trained with boxers. I mean, he's trained with Freddie Roach, and he's no stranger to a boxing ring. To be honest with you, I would have preferred this to be Roy Jones, because we talked about Roy Jones for a while. But I'm interested in you have a champion. Hold on. You have a champion in Anderson Silva going against a guy we know that does not want to be in there. That's where this fight gets really interesting for me.
Junior was a champion at one point in whatever the hell, organization. I still don't understand how those titles work. I mean, is it a frontline title? Is it a real title? Is it made up? I don't understand boxing titles, but I look at this fight, the senior fight against Camacho Jr., and then you just go down the list and you talk about, real boxers' sons. And listen, not that their sons aren't real boxers. And I don't know if you watched it. And apparently some jabs were taken at me on the recap show. And clearly I didn't listen to it. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a big Alexander Povetkin fan. And I watched the first fight against Dillian White. Well, I definitely watched the rematch last weekend. And on that card, Ricky Hatton's son had a fight. It was his pro debut. He had little to no amateur experience. Campbell Hatton. And he fought a guy that was 0-10 that they brought in on days' notice from Spain to fight on The Rock in Gibraltar. And the fight was kind of sloppy. Wasn't a whole lot of fun. The guy that was 0-10 got outboxed. He landed a couple of nice shots. So there's sons of boxers fighting. You've got De La Hoya that's supposed to fight. Again, we make the joke about YouTuber fighting like baseline UFC fighter. De La Hoya is supposed to fight an MMA fighter that exists in boxing. You got Miguel Cotto supposed to be taking on Juan Manuel Marquez. I mean, what do you think? Pacquiao watches that fight from his living room and just laughs at both of them. And then, if you're really twisted like me, and you want to watch MMA on Cam Soda, which you probably heard the website before, Fight Circus has another card coming out, and your two ringleaders are John Nutt and Bob Sapp, and Will Chope's going to fight two guys. How interested are you in that one?
Oh, ridiculously interested in it.
Are you like I'm a 100%? That's appointment viewing for me. I love those cards.
I can't believe that's appointment viewing for you, and you want nothing to do with Jake Paul and Ben Askren. All right, and we move on. Oh, real quick side note story. I saw Shane Mosley's son. This is who I did see fight in Phoenix. I saw Shane Mosley's son fight a couple of years ago in Phoenix, and Shane Mosley and his son both fought on the same card. He fought like a 5-7 guy, and I mean, he was having to explain. He got the victory, but he was having to explain it after the fight. Like he didn't look all that great. I mean, Shane Mosley was a dog, and this kid wasn't. This kid was like a front runner and kind of was out there just to look good, and cash in on his father's name ultimately. But that's the thing with these sons is that whatever led their father to the sport is not what led their son to the sport. And sometimes they end up, you can really get hurt, messing around with a guy like Anderson Silva if your heart's not in it. All right, Craig, let's move on to posting to the book. Craig Scott Coker told MMA Junkie, and it was reported by friend of the show, Nolan King, that a fight between Fedor Emelianenko and either Junior Dos Santos and Alistair Overeem, who are fight free agents right now, might be in the offing. Coker's quote is, we're not going to sign these guys to like a 2-year, 6-fight deal or build them up. They've done everything. They're already proved themselves. They're already legends of the sport. But what I will say is we do have legends of the sport here. If we go down that road and we think a Fedor opponent will work, Alistair and Fedor will be very, very interesting to me. Junior Dos Santos and Fedor will be very interesting to me. Will it be very interesting to you, Craig?
So I had heard, Middle Easy tweeted this one out a little early, and they said there's probably going to be a JDS fight with Fedor in Russia. I'd rather see Overeem and Fedor. I mean, then you really have a pride connection. So for me, that's the fight to make. I think both guys would make a welcomed addition to the Bellator Legends division. I mean, after all, Tim Johnson, friend of the show, former guest, is their number one contender at this point. So yeah, you bring in JDS and you could have him fight like Czech Congo or Javi Ayala or Matt Mitrione. Like, there's fights to make. They're not super safe for these guys, but I mean, listen, Alistair Fedor, that'd be a good one. Fedor still packs a bit of a punch, as evidence of him knocking out a 265-pound Rampage in his last fight with like one weird punch off the dome. So yeah, for me, it's Alistair and Fedor, and then you give JDS one of those other ranked contenders, but not like Moldavsky or an up and comer. Not like a Steve Mowry would be a weird fight because Steve would try and like hit him and then take him down and submit him, which would be actually, you know what? Talk me into that one already. I talked myself into it. Give me Junior Dos Santos and Steve Mowry. Book it.
Let's move on to Finish Strong.
All right, John. So for Finish Strong, I mean, there's a lot of news in MMA lately, but again, we kind of hit some of the major points. A couple of the talking points. Dominic Cruz is looking to fight maybe Sean O'Malley. A little bit of call out there. We had Brave CF 50 today, and John, I doubt you saw it, but I didn't because it was during the day. So I'm going to go back and watch it, of course. But 4 UFC vets lost, and they are, by name, Felipe Silva. He had a couple of fights in the UFC a few years ago. But then when we get further up the card, like, these are some names you've heard of. Zach Makovsky lost a split decision. You had 2 UFC vets take on each other in the co-main event. Ali Bagotinov beat Dustin Ortiz. And then in the main event, Al Salawi finished the Austrian wonder boy, Ismail Nordiev. And he was just in the UFC not that long ago. And he won like the little tournament style that they had with, I think it was EMC here back last year. So any surprises there at all? I mean, Brave kind of doing the old one championship, setting these guys up to fail, possibly.
Yeah, I think the name that sticks out to me is Bogatinov, because forever, man, he was thought to be this guy. And we've had a lot of these guys who you think is going to be the next big thing and never pans out. But, he was really thought to be a real threat to Demetrius Johnson. That just never happened. So that anytime these guys, they stick in your brain from a certain time period and you're just like, oh, yeah, I remember he was this. So that sticks out to me. But I guess my question to you, to take it a little bit deeper, is do you think that these guys just aren't taking fighting as serious when they're not in a big promotion, or do you think that the tide is raising here and the guys they're fighting are getting better?
I mean, Khamzat Chimaev came from Brave, right? So you look at the talent that Brave has. I like the production. Their ring announcer, The Lion, goes a little bit too into it, but hey, I mean, we're fighting a picks. Let's get into it. But I look at these cards. I enjoy them for what they're worth, and they do actually have some really good talent. I know, when you have the backing of the Kingdom of Bahrain, you can kind of do quite a bit. So with a card like that, it's great. And for Bagotinov, that's a big win to boost your stock right now. I mean, beating Dustin Ortiz, who's just kind of left the UFC, so to speak, that's neat. And then the last one that I wanted to kind of hit on, Finish Strong. BKFC kind of announced that they're going to launch a pension fund for fighters, and Dave Feldman seemed to think it was a really important thing to kind of set forth. If you fight on the card coming up in April, that's when it's going to start to kick off. Listen, I mean, other MMA promotions aren't really doing this. It's not like boxing really does this. Hey, BKFC is going to do it. What do you really think about this one? Just quick.
I'm going to say this with all due respect to BKFC. It only matters if they stick around. So I think that if they organize a 401k or something that would outlive them for fighters, that's one thing. But to think that they're going to be so successful that these fighters will the rules for this is what? Years, number of fights, whatever it is. So a couple of things would have to happen. They'd have to hit the number of years or hit the number of fights. And then BKFC would have to not, go into bankruptcy or anything like that in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And I hope they don't. I'm just saying there's a lot of things that have to happen for this to become a reality. If the UFC said they were starting a pension fund, I'd be like, okay, the UFC is going to be here in 30 years. It's different than if, a promotion with questionable finances is going to be here.
Only fighters who sign multi-fight deals will be eligible for the program. They didn't disclose how much money the promotion would contribute to the account, whether the contributions were set as a percentage of purses or the set amount per fight when contributions would be made, or details about how the money would be distributed. Once a fighter had met the requirements to receive payments, a financial services firm will oversee the BKFC Wealth Management Fund, Feldman said, with BKFC as the owner of the policy and fighters listed as co-owners. So I guess all we can say, from me quoting MMA Fighting, is that it's interesting. Hopefully it happens, and we'll see what happens.
And that's what you always want when you're dealing with, finances, is vagueness. Okay, let's move on to start the conversation. Craig, breaking news that you already broke, just into the Fight Night Picks news desk.
There was a guy that lost his finger at CFFC 94.
Yeah, we'll start the conversation. If you lose your fingers, should you stop fighting? Kevin Holland will be replacing Darren Till in the main event of UFC Vegas 23. Holland is coming off a loss to Derrick Brunson and steps into a fight many believed that would give the winner a title shot. If the UFC holds to that, giving the winner a title shot, would it severely throw 185 into a flux? So let's start the conversation by asking, does the UFC have a responsibility to maintain divisional integrity, or do they just make the biggest fights with the guys who say yes?
I think, the fight between Robert Whittaker and Kelvin Gastelum, probably a title eliminator more so than this, based on where we're at right now. Now, does Gastelum, if he wins that fight, does he deserve a title shot? I don't believe so. You beat Whittaker, that's great, but before that, it was Ian Heinisch, and we were on the skids before that. So it's a little difficult for me to say. I mean, again, you got to look at it. Dan Henderson was what, 47? Was he 45, 47? He got a title shot. So anything's possible. Anything's possible, as Kevin Garnett said. But, I look at this one, and does Holland deserve this opportunity? No, he doesn't. But do you think Brunson could step in? Well, if he could, he would have, but he probably can't. So he didn't. So Holland gets this opportunity. And I hate to make questions out of questions, but do you really think Holland has a good opportunity in this fight against Vettori? I mean, you look at the run that he had going up until Brunson, and I had Holland to beat Brunson. Matt at the 11th hour picked Brunson to beat Holland. Kudos to him. But realistically, Holland was on a heater. He was our 2020 Fighter of the Year. And we can't take all the wind out of his sails, but just based on the performance that he had against Brunson, and the way he was drawing at Dana and Habib, and he wasn't listening to Travis Luter, and we talked about that and started the conversation last week, I don't think Holland beats Vettori. Vettori's a good wrestler and a good striker. Vettori has all the tools to beat Holland. I just don't see a great path to victory for Holland in this one. Could he wow me with a crazy knockout? 100% he could. 2020 Fighter of the Year. We can't take that away from him. But it was so short of a time ago where he lost to Brunson in such, whatever the opposite of impressive fashion is. I don't like the matchup at all.
Well, today's April 1st and the fight's April 10th. So where this gets weird for me is I don't think that Michael Bisping was anywhere near the fighter that Luke Rockhold was, but he got an opportunity on short notice, and the rest was history. So I think that where this gets weird is who gets more affected by the change in styles. If Holland just sits around saying, I'm kind of scouting in the entire, which wouldn't surprise me if he did. He just kind of has the book on the entire division because he's a guy that likes to, hop on opportunities when they're available. Okay, but going from Darren Till to Derek Holland isn't exactly a lateral move. They're different guys. They're different. They bring different things to the table. So the unfortunateness would be if Marvin Vettori's run gets stopped because of a late addition. But again, like you said, if you're Derek Brunson, you have to make a decision. Do I do what's best for my career, meaning I take fights on full camps, or I do what's best for my career by I grab every opportunity that's possible? And I think that Holland is wild enough to take short notice fights and maybe make something happen with him. And, the reality is Jorge Masvidal took the Usman fight on short notice and then kind of worked that into a rematch down the road. So let's look at this scenario. Holland takes the short notice fight on Vettori, makes it more interesting than we thought he would, right? They go the distance. Now Vettori gets the win, gets a title shot, is victorious. Now Kevin Holland is the guy who gave him a hell of a fight. That's why you take these opportunities. So I think that I'm getting away from the question. Like, I guess the question is, should the UFC protect Derrick Brunson or not on this one? And say, they have this fight that they're trying to fill. It's 9 days out.
Holland was in that weird situation too. Like, you got to consider it. If we back up to December, Holland was supposed to fight Jack Hermanson. And then you had Jacare was supposed to fight Vettori. And then they ended up crisscrossing. Holland gets Jacare, knocks him out. Now Jacare's fighting Andrea Muniz. How crazy is that? Jacare's not even in the top 15. But back to our earlier bingo card answer, Robbie Lawler is. Go figure. But it's such a tricky one. And then you're right. I mean, you look at Derrick Brunson. I think what you have to do at this point, he's no longer that elite gatekeeper that everybody's been calling him, probably myself included. You got to give him his due. Is it a fight with Costa? Is it a fight against Jared Cannonier? Those are really the only two dance partners that are kind of out there floating about without opponents. So we'll have to see what happens, but really interesting developments going into next weekend.
And just to put a bow on this whole thing, I don't really think that the UFC has any responsibility here. I think that their job is to book fights, and either when they pick up the phone and call you, either you take the fights or you don't, and that's on you. They're gonna give guys opportunities who are willing to take fights on short notice. And if you're Derrick Brunson, I'm not saying you should have taken this fight if it was offered to you. I'm sure it was offered to you if you beat Kevin Holland and it was offered to Kevin Holland, but I just think that, the UFC has to make fights. That's what they do. And if you're not willing to say yes when they call, then sometimes you're going to lose out on these opportunities. All right, guys, there you have it. Another Fight Night Picks early stoppage episode is in the books. Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FMP. I can be followed at SM Cornerman. The fight has been stopped. We'll see you next week. Craig, say something witty.
Go check out This Week in MMA.
I like this guy.
Peace.